Hello and welcome to episode 63 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Suzie, I am your host, and I am an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. Before I get into today's episode, I want to just let you all know that you can now book in for the Akashic Abundance class. You can do that through my website. I'll put a link in the show notes. And if you haven't already done level 1, so you don't already have an existing Akashic Records practice, but you want to do the Akashic Abundance class, drop me an email, because for the Akashic Abundance class, you do need to know how to go into your own Akashic Records. That's the prerequisite. But there is still time to be able to learn that through self-study through the level 1 portal. I will, of course, do a different podcast episode on what we're going to be covering in that Akashic Abundance class. I'm really excited to help you all deepen your own Akashic Records practice. And this is the first of a few new modules that I'm going to do to help you deepen your own practice. And of course, the first one is going to be all about your relationship to money. So today's topic, I'm going to be talking about the differences between a Kundalini awakening and a spiritual awakening. And I just have a quick caveat on this topic. I am not a Kundalini teacher. What I'm going to be sharing is going to be based on my personal experience and also my experience working with other people who have experienced Kundalini awakening. So before we get into Kundalini awakening, spiritual awakening, what's the similarities, what's the differences? Let's first define what Kundalini is, because this term Kundalini awakening gets thrown around a lot in the spiritual community, and a lot of the time there isn't any definition and understanding as to what the term is, where the term comes from. So I want to do that first here today. Kundalini is first referenced in the Upanishads, and the Upanishads are one of the core texts of Hinduism. So the term Kundalini is a Sanskrit term, comes from originally the Upanishads and is first associated with Hinduism. It is later associated with other systems such as Tantra, such as Hatha Yoga, but this is where the term Kundalini originates from. It's a Sanskrit term that can loosely be defined as a coiled snake, and you'll see a lot of symbolism around the snake or the serpent referencing Kundalini. And it's understood that the Kundalini is a form of our internal divine feminine energy, our Shakti. So that's another term that you might see used a lot around this conversation. In some spiritual traditions, you will see that the Kundalini is located near the base of the spine in the etheric body. In other traditions, you will see the Kundalini located at the crown chakra, and the root chakra merely being a switch to turn it on. In other systems, you will see that where the Kundalini resides in the subtle body is going to be dependent upon the level of awakening that the soul is in when it comes into the incarnation. What I mean by this is if somebody has previously worked with this energy in multiple different lifetimes, then when they come into an incarnation, the Kundalini may be connected with the sacral chakra or the solar plexus chakra. So you're going to find different descriptions, different understandings, different explanations of Kundalini, where it's located and how to work with it, depending upon the tradition that you're going to have a look at. So what is a Kundalini awakening according to the traditional definitions? It's about the awakening of this divine feminine energy, the Shakti, the awakening of that, and it moving up what's called the Sushumna. Now, the Sushumna is the central channel that runs up the spine. In the yogic traditions, you talk about chakras, you also talk about nadis, and the Sushumna is the central nadi. When we reference Kundalini awakening, it's this understanding that this energy has arisen and it's going to move up that central column through the primary chakra system. And traditionally it was understood that this could happen in one chakra or it could happen in all of the chakras. The understanding was that Kundalini awakening can be different things. It's not always the experience of the energy moving all the way through the Sushumna up to the crown chakra and beyond. And again, traditionally, there were seen to be 9 different methods of awakening. And what I mean by that is 9 different methods of stimulating the awakening of this energy. Of course, there are also spontaneous Kundalini awakenings, which is what I experienced. But traditionally, there were seen as these 9 different methods of awakening. And the information about Kundalini came through to the West in the early 1900s from people who had been visiting the East, going through these different systems. And Kundalini specifically, as far as I can tell, is brought through from Sir John Woodruff. And we also see writing about Kundalini by Carl Jung in his work. Now, when we look at the intentions, the aims of why were people wanting to awaken this energy, the aim was always to bring higher consciousness, higher wisdom down into the human body and down into the physical plane of Earth for the benefit of all. Okay, so the intention behind working with the Kundalini energy was never about individualism or that person gaining superpowers or anything like that. It was always about being able to act as a clear bridge between the higher realms and the realm that we currently inhabit. So we understand the tradition, we understand the background of where the Kundalini conversation starts, and we understand what it is technically. It's this awakening of this energy. So why do we sometimes see the term Kundalini awakening and spiritual awakening being used interchangeably? And what's the actual difference between the two? So a really good way to think about this is that everybody who has a Kundalini awakening, whether it's spontaneous or it's something that they have worked towards, that's going to lead to a spiritual awakening. It's going to lead to an awakening of a new level of consciousness. Okay? However, not everybody who has a spiritual awakening is going to have a Kundalini awakening. So that's a good way to think of what's the difference. Okay, so the main difference between the two is that awakening of the Kundalini is an extremely physical process. What I mean by that is it's an intense experience for the physical form. Because of the intensity of the energy that's being awoken and the movement of this through that central channel, and as it moves through that central channel, it's going to blast out everything that is sitting in those chakras that you don't want to deal with. It can be a very intense thing. It's a much deeper physical process than what you experience during a spiritual awakening. During the spiritual awakening, there can absolutely be physical side effects and symptoms. And I talk about this in a different episode where we talk about ascension symptoms. And I'll link that into the show notes here. So there absolutely can be physical side effects, but the Kundalini experience is a very intense physical process. The physical symptoms with the spiritual awakening tend to be a little bit gentler. Now, one of the things that happens when the Kundalini awakens is you start to access cosmic consciousness. It's very connected to higher consciousness, and the experience that people can have with that varies from person to person. Both a spiritual awakening and a Kundalini awakening involve a shift in consciousness, and both can be supported through spiritual practices. So all of the different practices that you see out there, all of these can support you if you're going through a Kundalini awakening or if you're going through a spiritual awakening. So they are very similar. It just tends to be that it's a much more intense physical experience with a Kundalini awakening. And the kind of signs and symptoms of that are things like going through extremely emotionally turbulent times. So because the Kundalini is blasting through any of those repressed emotions, you can feel like you're on a real emotional roller coaster. High highs and low lows in a very short space of time. There can be lots of heat, lots of tingling, voluntary muscle movements, spasms. It's going to fry your nervous system, absolutely. And if you feel like you may be going through a Kundalini awakening, I'd highly recommend listening to my nervous system episode, because supporting your nervous system is essential when you're working with Kundalini energy. Someone who's having a Kundalini awakening may experience visions, hallucinations, activations, so new clairsenses coming online, and just an increased sensitivity in every way. So your spidey senses essentially being much, much stronger than they ever have been, and being very sensitive to the energies of other people, what's going on in your local area. If you go to a specific place, you're going to feel the energies of that place. It's this increased in sensitivity in every single way. Of course, because of all that, you will experience sleep disturbances, you will experience lots of strange mental activity, and it can be very disorienting, and it's absolutely very discombobulating. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the 9 different methods of awakening because, as I said earlier, I'm not a Kundalini teacher, I'm not a Kundalini practitioner, but I do want to just touch upon someone activating your Kundalini for you. And traditionally, this was called Shaktipat. And Shaktipat was given to you by a yogic teacher, whichever tradition that you were working with to work with the Kundalini energy. And it was given to you after a period of preparation. People who have worked with Kundalini energy, or if you've had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, you will know how intense the energy is. And I personally had a spontaneous Kundalini experience about 20 years ago, and I would have absolutely really appreciated the ability to prepare my physical form for that experience because it was intense and it led to lots of different things that I won't get into here today. But Shaktipat would be granted after a period of preparation, and that period of preparation was for as long as your guru, your teacher, would determine was necessary for you. Now, I know in today's society, we have lots of people out there offering Kundalini activations. And what I would ask you all to consider, if you are looking for somebody to activate your Kundalini, if you want to use that as a method of awakening, is use your discernment in respect of, do I want someone to do this for me, or do I want to work on creating a system and a structure that's going to be able to handle it? For those of you who are having a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, there's nothing you can do about that. If a spontaneous awakening is happening, it's something your soul has agreed prior to coming into the incarnation. It's not something you can prepare for. But I know a lot of you will be out there wanting to go and have this Kundalini activation experience. But what I would urge you all to do is please educate yourself on Kundalini, the experience of it, how activations actually take place. And I'm going to do a separate episode on activations and initiations because it's very important that you understand what that is going to do to you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I would have absolutely loved to have had access to a teacher, a coach, a practitioner when I experienced my spontaneous Kundalini awakening, just to understand what I was experiencing. And this is how it would work in traditional circumstances. There would be a preparation period. There would be the activation, which would be received from the guru. And then you would work with that person in the aftermath of the activation to be able to integrate everything in. Another thing just to quickly note is that if you have a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, how the Kundalini operates, if you are in a biological female body or a biological male body, there can also be differences there. So it's important to understand how it's going to affect you, not just in a general way, but in respect of which biological form you're in for this lifetime. I guess my final thoughts on this are, if you're feeling called to work with Kundalini, I don't want anyone to be scared. I don't want anyone to have fear around working with this energy, but I do want you all just to take a minute to understand what this energy is, how it's going to impact you, and then find somebody to work with if it is something that you want to work through. You, of course, have the power within you to awaken your own Kundalini. And where I say find someone to work with, it's more to help support you through the process because it is intense. Of course, everything I'm sharing is my opinion, my perspective. You can take it or leave it. But I would emphasize that it is important that, you really resonate with the person and that this isn't being sold to you as a quick fix, and that you're not seeking it as a quick fix, as though having a Kundalini activation is going to solve all of your problems. It's a very intense process, and it will bring a lot up for you. And there are amazing practitioners out there who will be able to prepare you, work with you, and work with you in that aftermath. So please do seek those practitioners out. I hope that this has cleared some things up for you, so that when you see the term Kundalini Awakening, you now know what that is, what that's referring to. And if you're indeed experiencing it, I hope it's given you some clarity as to you're definitely not going crazy. You're having this experience and it is intense. So be really kind to yourself always, be compassionate towards yourself. And when you do need help with these things, there are people out there to help. So I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I will see you next week for the next installment.